कोलकाता रेप केस की आज हर जगह बात हो रही है और सब ये पूछ रहे हैं कि व्हाट आर द लीगल चैलेंजेस दैट पीपल फेस व्हेन फेस्ड विद सेक्सुअल वायलेंस।
कि तुम अच्छी लड़की बनोगी तो तुम्हारे साथ रेप नहीं होगा, whereas the normal is मैं जैसी भी हूँ मेरे साथ रेप नहीं होगा।
करेक्ट।
बेटे पढ़ाओ बेटी बचाओ।
हाँ तो अच्छा हुआ मर गई, कोटा वाली सीट में ही होगी ना।
Law will come into the picture once cases get reported. This concept of घर की इज्जत is so deeply ingrained even in the victim's mind.
एक रेपिस्ट की साइकोलॉजी क्या होती है, या क्या फैक्टर्स हैं जो मेक्स अ रेपिस्ट?
Probably because I was drunk, तो हो सकता है gave consent and I don't remember.
जब आप मीडिया रिपोर्टिंग भी देखते हो, क्या बोला जाता है, किसी की बेटी थी, बहू थी, बहन थी, एक इंसान थी।
Is it easier, given the kind of shame and stigma in our society, for a woman to just keep quiet? If she takes up the route of justice, what intrinsically is more fulfilling that way versus forget it, move on with my life?
कहाँ मिलती है ये गुड गर्ल की मैथ?
Why is no one talking about the power dynamics that enable sexual violence? Welcome to another extremely important episode of the Witty podcast. Today we are diving into a topic that's as heart-wrenching as it's urgent, the systemic and societal issues surrounding sexual violence. हमारा focus Kolkata case पे रहेगा, which is a tragic reminder of the atrocities that many of us have to face. Today I am joined by Mr. Mayank Arora, who's a lawyer, and Ms. Bhavya Malhotra, who's a trauma-informed therapist. आज हमने जो भी बातें करी हैं वो सिर्फ बोलने के लिए या सोचने के लिए या एक बारी वीडियो देखने के लिए नहीं करी हैं, वो हमने करी है ताकि हम एक्चुअली उस पर एक्ट कर पाएं और चेंज ला सकें। सो शेयर दिस इन्फॉर्मेशन विद समवन हु माइट बेनिफिट फ्रॉम दिस एंड कंटिन्यू द कॉन्वर्सेशन। रिमेंबर, द चेंज बिगिंस फ्रॉम ईच वन ऑफ अस। कोलकाता रेप केस की आज हर जगह बात हो रही है और सब ये पूछ रहे हैं कि व्हाट आर द लीगल चैलेंजेस दैट पीपल फेस व्हेन फेस्ड विद सेक्सुअल वायलेंस। So, since you're a lawyer, can you guide us through that?
See, when you talk about legal challenges, there are many, right? From Nirbhaya in 2012 to now, this horrific incident in 2024. So we've come a long way in some changes that have been made in the laws through judicial decisions, but the legal challenges still remain. The challenges with regard to investigation, the challenges with regards to speedy disposal of these matters, the challenges with regards to conviction. At every stage there is a challenge. So I think we need to bifurcate where do the challenges lie more, whether it's shoddy investigation that leads to a poor trial and therefore no convictions, or whether we're talking about a general load on the system, because we're all aware that while there is a talk of improvements, there is a talk of bringing synergies, but even after having specialized courts, there is a lot of pendency. So therefore, the cases and the trials go on forever, and only then, finally we get to see a final outcome. And unless it's pressed hard, there is good advocacy, there are sometimes chances that there is not even a conviction. So therefore, the challenge is galore.
But ऐसा क्यों है? Why can't we have fast track courts? Why can't we have a speedy mechanism to address these issues?
देखो त्विषा, ऐसा नहीं है कि why can't we have is not the question, why don't we have is actually the right question. सही सवाल ये कि क्यों नहीं है। उसका रीज़न ये है that we are a country of 1.4 billion people. हम 140 करोड़ लोगों की कंट्री हैं, and the number of judges out there, number of good advocates out there, it pales in comparison to the number of cases that comes to the court. So therefore, as much as you try to build courts, as much as you try to build more courts, bring more judges, it still falls short because of the sheer number and the pendency and the load. And it's not just the courts, even the investigating agencies. Almost every police station today is short-staffed, right? There is no specific team to investigate certain kind of cases. Time and again it has been stated that आप investigation का wing अलग कीजिए, law and order का wing अलग कीजिए. It ends up coming into one person or one officer, repeatedly. So the challenges are not just confined to कि why don't we have. It is also spreading beyond, why is there a lax here? That's because there is a general load on the system, and systemic reforms and big infrastructure reforms need to take place before things can improve.
When you talk about reforms, तो क्या रिफॉर्म्स चाहिए हमें?
देखो, वी कैन ब्रेक डाउन द एंटायर क्रिमिनल जस्टिस सिस्टम इनटू 3 पिलर्स. 3 बड़े पिलर हैं. पहला पिलर है इन्वेस्टिगेशन, दूसरा पिलर है एडवोकेसी और एडजुडिकेशन, और तीसरा पिलर आता है क्राइम एंड तीसरा पिलर इज पनिशमेंट, राइट. इन द फर्स्ट पिलर विच इज इन्वेस्टिगेशन, we not only need very specialized investigators, and I'm talking in the light of a heinous crime like this. I'm not talking about general petty crimes. For such crimes, how do they handle forensics? How do they handle the sensitivity of the crime? How do they handle the fact that there should be no media leakage? And how do they handle the trauma that the family is facing? These are multiple aspects. A specialized agency only to investigate heinous crimes like these, sensitive crimes like these, needs to be in place, and not just needs to be in place but also needs to be actively aware of what is to be done and not to be done. I remember in 2020 there was a Ministry of Home Affairs guideline जिसमें बोला गया था कि यार हम आपको किट दे रहे हैं, एक दिस इज अ फोरेंसिक किट दैट यू विल यूज ड्यूरिंग इन्वेस्टिगेशन. उसमें स्वाब्स थे, उसमें पैकेट्स थे, उसमें हर तरह का कलेक्शन टूल था. It was distributed between states, but I am really not sure how many of them are today being used, how many were used in this particular incident, and we'll talk about this incident in a little more detail as you talk about it. So investigation mein we need specialized investigators, especially for heinous crimes, if I were to summarize. On the judicial side and on the court side, we clearly need more adjudicators, we need more judges, we need more fast track courts, we need specialized courts, we need trained courts which are trained into inquiring into matters like this, which are trained into adjudication of matters like these. It's not that today they're not there, ऐसा नहीं कि आज नहीं है, but ज़रूरत है कि ज़्यादा कोर्ट्स हों, क्योंकि अगर ये मैटर टाइमली एडजुडिकेट नहीं होंगे और टाइमली guilty punish nahi honge, there is no general deterrence then in the mind of public. And then also there is a requirement of sensitive advocacy, I'll say. You cannot have great courts but not great lawyers to assist those courts. So on the judicial side, you also need great assistance by good lawyers who are able to assist the courts correctly, help them appreciate the evidence correctly. And then comes punishment, So the courts always, while deciding punishment, look into aggravating factors and mitigating factors.
What are those two?
Like, for example, the age of the perpetrator or the accused, the kind of people dependent on him, the general, how is he placed in the society, what are the vulnerabilities he is also carrying. So the principle is simple. Every saint has a past and a sinner has a future. So the courts have to account for that, right? But there has to be an exception carved out, where in certain heinous crimes, if one is found guilty, then maybe the mitigating factors are not accounted for. Only the aggravating factors are accounted for while delivering punishment. And sometimes it is not just the punishment alone. It is how early did the guilty get punishment. So I think the bigger issue is hastening the process from crime to punishment, and in the process manage the sensitivity that goes along with it. So these are some of the reforms that come to my mind immediately.
I have 3 points regarding this. First is, law will come into the picture once cases get reported.
Yes.
This concept of ghar ki izzat is so deeply ingrained even in the victim's mind that even if something heinous like this happens, you question thrice. Complain करूँ, मेरे बारे में question तो नहीं करेंगे कि मैं रात को बाहर क्या कर रही थी, या फिर why was I wearing a dress, or why was I drinking. Like, I'll be questioned. These kind of questions come to your mind before you even go ahead and report something. Another thing that happens, and unfortunately I know people who have gone through this, is you second guess कि probably it was consensual. Probably because I was drunk, तो हो सकता है I gave consent and I don't remember. So then people don't report. So this case of reporting is another problem, that we as individuals, before we point out कि law and order नहीं है, हमारी mentality इतनी fucked up है कि हम report भी नहीं करते हैं, शर्म के मारे, डर के मारे. The second thing here is, we've noticed in the case of Nirbhaya or in the Kolkata case also, the speed of justice is directly proportional to the media sensationalism. जितना जैसे मीडिया में आया वैसे ही सबने काम चालू कर दिया. तो what is the role of media here? Does it sensationalize a case or does it actually help get to justice quickly? But then again, इसमें क्या होता है, जो 90 और केस रिपोर्ट हो रहे हैं उन पे क्यों नहीं अटेंशन जा रही? The same thing happened to 90 others also, right? That. And the third thing on the idea of punishment, as you said, right now everyone is saying they should be sentenced to death. सोचना ही क्या है, सीधा मार दो. Why is that not happening? You think that's the right solution?
Okay, I'll try to answer them sequentially. देखो, पहला है shame, which is you rightly said, which is something that leads to lesser reporting. And it is not just shame, it is multiple other societal factors. People influencing the family wrongfully or the victim itself wrongfully. The general machinery not being sensitive for a victim to go and report such things. So the shame is not only within the family but every step of the way. A protracted trial where she has to go as a witness, if she is the witness, if she survives, any heinous act like this, when she goes to the court, the shame that she has to go through every time. So shame is at multiple levels. And so I read a very nice quote yesterday that touched me. It was "Bete padhao, beti bachao." So the other problem is that all of us need to be educated first before that that victim gets justice. So I think the role is with all of us to take away the shame, right? And you are right, it is more rural now a phenomena than urban. I don't see a lot of places where in urban areas, urban cities, people are feeling victimized or people are feeling ashamed to report it. In fact, as a lawyer, while we're talking about such a sensitive subject, we have to balance also. So there is also no dearth of false rape cases also being filed in the country today. And you would see that from judicial record. But that also again is a more urban phenomenon. In rural areas, you are right. I think a lot of education has to trickle down. A lot of बहुत ज़्यादा sensitize करने की ज़रूरत है और हम सबको करने की ज़रूरत है. Because this being ingrained in our society, इसको जाने में time लगेगा. And as people get more educated, as people get more exposure, as people get more connected, the problem is we forget after every big matter like this which is reported in the media, we all move on. And the system moves as usual, right? So create a high-end, a heightened level of sensitivity and awareness around this is most important, right? And that's where, when you talked very importantly, the role of media comes into my mind. So media is a very responsible pillar of not only the democracy, but I believe also of the criminal justice system or justice system per se. Right at this point in time, if I take reference of the recent Kolkata case, I'm realizing that there is lot of news in the media at the moment. I was hearing a learned Syrian advocate addressing the Honorable Supreme Court today, and his submissions were that most of it may not be true, which he wanted to apprise the Honorable Court, but the court listed the matter for later, and then probably that will all come out as we see the matter unravel and as we see the status reports being filed before the court. So I think at this point in time, barring every other incident, in such instances, I believe media should be highly, highly responsible. What goes out, what doesn't go out, what may be critical information, what may be leading to the accused getting more information than required. Let's say there are 4 accused in a matter, 1 is caught, the other 3 are on the run. Then what kind of media reports are leading to what kind of situation, in the investigation also. So I think their role is very, very important, and not just in reporting well, but I think also in creating a sensitivity around it, Unfortunately, there's also social media now, but then I think it is offset if we have a very, very responsible mass media on the other side. So that's the second one. And the third question that you asked was? The sentence, right? Look, justicing media trials and public lynching are all recognized words in our domain, right? Now, a public lynching or a media trial cannot take the place of, a trial and a process of justice that an accused has to go through, right? If this were to happen, we'll, trust you me, we'll have a worse society. We'll have a worse off society than a society that believes in the rule of law. And the rule of law also is for the accused as much as it is for the victim. And therefore, if I were to comment, I'll pray to God that the rule of law prevails in every situation, whether it's as heinous, as gut wrenching as this one, or a petty crime, or a traffic violation that we go through. I think the rule of law should prevail. We jumping to conclusions, we jumping to punish the guilty is not really a sign of a civilized society. I think as a civilized society, while we recognize that an accused may have committed a crime, but he is a human being nevertheless, entitled to the rule of law.
But what
Yes.
makes someone who's doing something so monstrous deserve equal treatment?
Yeah, so I'm not advocating equal treatment. I'm just saying that there is a process laid out for such heinous crimes also to be investigated and tried. And I'm also saying that without any impartiality, that process should be duly followed. And what results is in conviction, even, so today some people may argue, why is there there's no death penalty given, with the kind of generosity that people sometimes expect. So I'm not going into that moral side of it. All I'm saying is that following the due process is very important. Like you just said, it's very interesting. While there is a shame in someone's mind, yeah, I may or may not have given consent. I don't remember, I was drunk, maybe I was under the influence of alcohol. Now imagine a situation where the consent was not given and the accused is guilty. And imagine in a similar situation where possibly the consent was given and the accused was not guilty. How do you distinguish between the two? Now in this particular matter that we're discussing, the Kolkata case, how many more accused may be there? We don't know. There is so much news in the media at the moment. It's very sensitive at the moment. How many more people were involved? Why was there, why did a mob of 7,000 people came and ransacked the place? We don't know all of that yet, right? So to unravel all of this, if we jump to conclusions, we'll never reach true justice that we all deserve. And true justice is served when it goes through the churns. And they say, the wheels of justice may sometimes move slow, but they churn very fine. That's what my take is.
Bhavya, I would like to understand your ideas also.
So अभी हमने कुछ important चीज़ों के बारे में बात करी. We've talked about shame. We've talked even about guilt. Guilt और shame एक ऐसे emotions हैं जो हम इतना यूज़ करते हैं, but we are never able to equate it to what it means for mental health or in terms of nervous system health. तो एज अ ट्रॉमा इन्फॉर्म साइकोलॉजिस्ट जब आप वर्ड्स लाइक गिल्ट और शेम को लाते हो, इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टू अंडरस्टैंड ये हमारी बॉडी को क्या कर रहा है. तो नाउ दैट वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट कि अभी इस समय इतना आउटरेज है, राइट तो एक चीज़ होती है त्विषा कॉल्ड विंडो ऑफ टॉलरेंस. तो हमारे नर्वस सिस्टम्स हम सबके कुछ वेज में वायर होते हैं एज वी ग्रो अप बिकॉज ऑफ many factors. It could be our upbringing, it could be how we've got certain things in life, our social locations even, and a lot of things. जब ऐसी कोई चीज़ आती है जो इतनी अनबेरेबल फील होती है तो आपके विंडो ऑफ टॉलरेंस को वो फेंक देती है. विंडो ऑफ टॉलरेंस बेसिकली क्या होता है? सो देर इज़ थिंक ऑफ लाइक मे बी अ बेल कर्व, राइट. सो होता क्या है कि मोस्ट ऑफ द टाइम्स जस्ट इन दिस मिडिल स्पेस, यहाँ मिडिल स्पेस फील्स अ लिटिल बिट, हाँ यहाँ चीज़ें बेरेबल है मेरे लिए, जो लाइफ में हो रही है, लाइफ की जो प्रॉब्लम्स आ रही है, ये सब से मैं डील कर पा रहा या कर पा रही हूँ. अब दो लेयर्स होते हैं आउटसाइड वाले. एक होता है जहाँ पर आपको चीज़ें इतनी ओवरवेलमिंग लगती है कि या तो आप शट डाउन कर जाते हो या आपको इतनी ओवरवेलमिंग लगती है कि आप में इतनी एनर्जी है कि यू वांट right now. So emotions like anger come here. Emotions like I want justice right now comes here.
Extreme behavior.
The two extreme layers, right? And ऐसा नहीं है कि these are not relevant. These three are very much required to live a healthy life. The issue comes when आप अपने window of tolerance से बार बार बाहर चले जाते हो और टू अ पॉइंट जहाँ आपके जो रिस्पॉन्सेज होते हैं वो आपको ही दुख दे रहे हैं या आपको ही आपकी मेंटल हेल्थ या आपकी पर्सनल लाइफ को अफेक्ट कर रहे हैं. तो नाउ व्हेन वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट दिस थिंग, लाइक सर ऑल्सो सेड, मयंक सेड दैट कैपिटल पनिशमेंट की लोग बात करते हैं. इट्स वेरी ईजी, जबकि ऐसा एक केस हुआ, एवरीबडी इज़ एंग्री, एवरीबडी इज़ आउटसाइड ऑफ द विंडो ऑफ टॉलरेंस जहाँ चीज़ें ओके लगती हैं। अभी हमने इमीडिएट जस्टिस मांगा, अभी हमने बोला कि इसको अभी दैट केस इज़ डन एंड डस्टेड, पीपल फील आई हैव डन समथिंग टू गेट समवन जस्टिस, but that's not changing the ground reality. It's not changing the fact that आप everyday life में मे बी आप अपनी जो 1 साल की बच्ची है उसको सिखाने के लिए मॉडेस्टी बोल रहे हो, शेम शेम आपकी पैंटी दिख रही है. You know, this is from where these seeds start sowing about shame, about guilt and all these things. हम कितनी बार होते हैं, जैसे आपने कंसेंट की बात करी, राइट? तो या फिर कि पता नहीं चलता कि मैंने कंसेंट दी थी क्या जब मैं ड्रंक थी. आपको मैं एक बताती हूँ, एक स्टडी हुई थी व्हेन द मी टू मूवमेंट वाज हैपनिंग. सो दिस इज़ अ US बेस्ड प्रोफेसर एंड उन्होंने 2 एस्पेक्ट्स है इस चीज़ के. एक उन्होंने ये करा था कि ही इंटरव्यूड 50 रेपिस्ट टू काइंड ऑफ अंडरस्टैंड एंड कैटलॉग कि एक रेपिस्ट की साइकोलॉजी क्या होती है या क्या फैक्टर्स हैं जो मेक्स अ रेपिस्ट. ही वॉज बेसिकली ट्राइंग टू सी क्या इन लोगों में कुछ सिमिलैरिटीज़ है. एंड हिज आंसर वॉज दैट इट वॉज क्रेजी इन द सेंस दैट उनको लगा कि when they got the findings, it was all qualitative interviews. One was उन्होंने कभी ये नहीं बोला कि हमने रेप करा. They are convicted. Still they are saying मैंने रेप नहीं करा. But so these interview questions are very spoken in a way कि आपने क्या उनको उनके मना करने पे भी penetrate करा. तब वो कहते हैं हाँ. So it's about in a country like US where very much the vocabulary of consent, of penetration, all this is pervasive. वहाँ पे भी लोग ये एडमिट नहीं कर सकते कि उन्होंने रेप करा. उनके दिमाग में नहीं, मैंने रेप नहीं किया. तो इट्स अबाउट हाउ यू परसीव ह्यूमन बॉडीज, हुज बॉडी यू कैन कंट्रोल, नॉट कंट्रोल. एंड ऑल्सो एट द सेम टाइम, यू नो, लाइक विद मैन व्हाट ऑल्सो हैपेंड, द सेकेंड एस्पेक्ट ऑफ इट वॉज नन ऑफ दीज मैन हैड, यू नो, एनी कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स कि आप चलते हुए बोल सकते हो ये आदमी रेपिस्ट है. You know, it was about कि someone was even a school teacher. He was just tipped off by one like an incident. Just a window of tolerance was tipped off, driving him to that space. हम ये नहीं भूल सकते कि there is a society shaping this. Psychological determinants, risk factors definitely होते हैं. जैसे आप देखोगे casual sexism जिन boys group में होता है. सी कैजुअल सेक्सिज्म अलग अलग वेरिएंट डिग्रीज पे हर जगह होता है. बट क्या वो प्री डोमिनेंट है आपके गाय फ्रेंड्स में? क्या आपके पीयर ग्रुप में सिर्फ ये बात होती है कि लड़कियों की बॉडीज़ को कैसे देखा जाता है, लड़कियों की बॉडीज़ ऐसी है वैसी है? एंड जस्ट फॉर बीइंग अ लिटिल थिंग, आई एम नॉट यूजिंग द वर्ड्स दैट आर यूजुअली यूज्ड, राइट? तो इस सब में ये होता है कि व्हेन वी आर आस्किंग फॉर इंस्टेंट जस्टिस, कमिंग बैक टू इट ऑल, we are forgetting that these things, I think like Mayank very rightfully said, they are so entrenched in society that it will not help that one single case solves something like this. For example, in the Hyderabad case also, there was this instant encounter thing, right? But then news had started coming, I'm not sure of the verdict, like, but मुझे ये याद है तब भी I was thinking everybody was so happy and everybody had immediately forgotten कि ऐसा कुछ हुआ है. लोगों के दिमाग में है कि, और वी आर इन अ सोसाइटी, जब हम छोटे भी होते हैं हम कुछ गलत करते हैं हमें थप्पड़ मार देते हैं. ऑनेस्टली स्पीकिंग, दिस इज स्टिल द रियलिटी इन इंडिया. बहुत कॉन्शियस पेरेंटिंग या पॉजिटिव पेरेंटिंग जो आप वेस्ट में सुनते हो वो यहाँ अभी तक ऊपर वाले माले में भी, एज इन लाइक द लेयर्स वेयर इफ यू आर टॉकिंग अबाउट, वो इतना कम पेनिट्रेट हुआ है. पीपल थिंक यही तरीका है क्योंकि यही होता आ रहा है. एंड दे थिंक कि तुम्हें क्या सॉफ्ट बन जाना है दूसरों की तरह. दे डोंट अंडरस्टैंड रेजिलियंस versus being soft versus all of this. There is no vocabulary to also explain this. तो दूसरी बात इसमें ये आ जाती है कि when parents hit a child, the child is only learning fear. So when we talk about punishments as harsh also, when we talk about shame also, the perpetrator never even learns to have an understanding of what he has done to someone. यू नो कि एक जब निर्भया का केस हुआ था, आई रिमेंबर द मदर केम आउट एंड सेड मैं खुश हूँ कि शी हैड पास्ड अवे बिकॉज शी डिड नॉट हैव टू डील विद व्हाट्स हैपनिंग आफ्टरवर्ड्स, यू नो, फॉर गेटिंग द जस्टिस. एंड जब ऐसी इतनी एक्सट्रीम इंजरीज वी आर हियरिंग अबाउट द ग्रूसम थिंग्स, एंड आई थिंक Mayank कैन टेल मी, करेक्ट मी हियर, बट आई थिंक इन द करंट लॉज इट डजंट इवन कवर कि आप अगर ऑब्जेक्ट्स और सॉडोमी हो रही है, ये सब चीज़ें हो रही है, तो तब क्या क्राइटेरिया है? And do we then talk about, is there going to be a harsher punishment and is that going to solve anything? Does harsher punishment mean getting justice, or just does that mean कि okay, for that particular victim we've got a justice, but now others in society, there are copycats coming up. You know, there are people who are just saying कि अरे उसकी ही गलती हुई होगी. People will still say it even if we get someone convicted. So are we able to go back to the root of that shame in our society and say for both men and women? Because see, one more thing that comes up is men feel, not men feel, but if you think about patriarchy at large, women are seen as either अगर कंटेम्प्रेरी टाइम में देख लो, इफ यू डोंट वांट टू गो एज बैक, पहले तो ये होता था वी आर कमोडिटीज, वी वर लाइक शीप, राइट, कि आप शादी के चक्कर में ये हो रहा है. इन कंटेम्प्रेरी टाइम्स ऑल्सो वी आर स्टिल सीन एज एन एक्सटेंशन ऑफ आर फैमिलीज. जब आप मीडिया रिपोर्टिंग भी देखते हो, क्या बोला जाता है, किसी की बेटी थी, बहू थी, बहन थी, एक इंसान थी. वो पार्ट कब आएगा? एक किसी का पर्सनहुड समझने में कितना टाइम लगेगा? इवन व्हेन रेप्स हैपन एंड व्हेन यू लाइक फॉर the perpetrator who they've caught up right now, I'm not calling him, he's not been trialed yet, but there is definitely history of being in abusive marriages where he's beaten his wives, 3 other wives. And so the thing that comes here is when you talk about shame, it has to be dealt as a society and not just for the victim. And when I say not just for the victim, I mean to say that not just what women experience, but the shame men also experience. Because if you think about it, if a woman is asserting herself and the man has been always taught कि एक औरत आपका extension है, वो domestic होनी चाहिए, उसको ये करना चाहिए, वो करना चाहिए, and suddenly he's seeing this very independent woman who doesn't need her, and suddenly he's also feeling emancipated. What is he doing with his shame? Is he able to do something with it? Because if we are not helping our men deal with their shame, then this is also going to keep happening further. Because और जब हम विमेन को सिखा रहे अपने लिए खड़ा होना, हम मेन को ये नहीं सिखा रहे कि आप देखो उनको खड़े होते हुए. विंडो ऑफ टॉलरेंस बढ़ाओ ये देखने के लिए कि दिस वुमन कैन स्टैंड ऑन हर फीट विदाउट यू गोइंग आउटसाइड ऑफ योर विंडो ऑफ टॉलरेंस.
I have 2-3 questions here, but I'll start with the first one that I have, and then I think both of you can chip in here. Is it easier, according to you, given the kind of shame and stigma in our society, for a woman to just keep quiet and move on, get therapy and move on, rather than seek justice and then go through all of that shame? And also, and I think you can chip in here, if she takes up the route of justice, what intrinsically is more fulfilling that way versus forget it, move on with my life?
See, I would personally say that it has to depend on a lot of things. Depends on the kind of social location you have. You may be someone with a lot more resources. You may also be someone with a lot more concrete evidence that will hold up in court. Then maybe that means for me it may be easier to work through that shame and just go for it. But if I am someone, if you know if I'm, like you said, the drunk example also, if I'm drunk and let's say the so-called person who's done this to me, he says I was also drunk, so what? So I also didn't give you my consent and things like that. There's so many small nitty-gritties in such things. I feel that it's a very personal. It also it also is related to, if we think a little bit more from the psychological point of view, how much of we call something a generalized resistance resources. What basically it means is that, you know, some people will have and resources are not just, you know, social and economical. I mean resources in terms of relationships, in terms of people you can trust, in terms of like some kind of strength you derive from maybe your personal work, maybe your own, like a lot of people, when you think about resilience, and this is something traumatic you're telling me about, there's something called post-traumatic growth. So a lot of people are able to channelize this in this way, instead that they help others get justice because they couldn't do it for themselves. So it has so many different factors to it that there is, I don't think I personally can give you a yes or no answer.
Mayank, what do you think?
All right, so you know, this question interestingly touched me in many ways. But to respond to it, at no point in time and in very unequivocal terms, I'll say moving on is not the answer, right? I know the road to justice is tough, right? In the country that I imagine that we should leave for our generations to come is a country where the justice system not only brings the accused to their final destination, but it also has some bit of pathological and psychological healing for the victim. That's the justicing that we dream of as lawyers. Although I know this is not, this path is not easy, but I would certainly, in the even in the weakest of my moments, say that if you've gone through an experience where you did not give consent, there is no question of moving on. And I was hearing my colleague here, very interestingly, she told, this is built in our system, and I was reminiscing a point where, one day I have a little daughter of 9 years, right? She came and told me, Papa, I don't want to wear this t-shirt, look, my slip shows. I said, so what? What is the point? But, the fact that our young girls and daughters also go through that bodily shame from the very beginning without getting the confidence, right? And our boys don't get the education that their confidence is not coming out of nothing. It is coming out of the fact that you are also equally responsible to build a safe society for everyone. Just because you are sometimes physically stronger doesn't mean that you can do anything without consent, and no means a no. Right. So I think there's also a little bit of, I would not impose it on everyone, but I would certainly make a case for a social responsibility that all of us have. If today I tolerate injustice, I'll be tolerating it for many others, not just for myself, right? So therefore, that would be my response to this question.
Another thing is that increasingly people are viewing rape not just as a sex crime, but rather an assertion of power and control. What do you think about that?
So I think I did touch upon it a little bit earlier. It's that when you're growing up, I'll give you two scenarios. You have in the same house a man, a child who's a boy, a child who's a girl. They're growing up together, but I'm sure a lot of us would want to say that नहीं, अब हम ऐसा नहीं करते, लड़के लड़की में कोई फ़र्क नहीं होता. बट वो फ़र्क हम जो बात करते हैं आज भी वो थोड़ा इंटेलेक्चुअल और अपॉर्चुनिटी वाइज होता है. हाँ, आप अपने बच्चे को पढ़ने भेज रहे हो. हाँ, आप अपने बच्चों को आपस में लड़के लड़कियों को खेलने दे रहे हो. हाँ, आप ये भी समझ रहे हो कि हाँ, बॉयज़ एंड गर्ल्स कैन बी फ्रेंड्स. बट क्या आप वो समझ रहे हो कि जब एक उम्र आती है, जैसे एडोलेसेंस आती है, दे आर स्टार्टिंग टू ग्रो डिफरेंटली नाउ. दे मे नॉट बी सीमिंग लाइक विजुअली वो इक्वल नहीं दिख रहे हैं और वो बच्चे नहीं लग रहे उनके. समवन्स ग्रोइंग एन एडम्स एप्पल, समवन्स ग्रोइंग ब्रेस्ट, एंड इट्स अ वेरी ऑकवर्ड फेज. एंड आई नो सम ऑफ माई गाय फ्रेंड्स हु टेल मी कि जब मेरा एडम्स एप्पल आ रहा था तब इट वॉज सो वियर्ड फॉर माई मॉम, बिकॉज मम्मा के कोई भाई नहीं थे, सिर्फ सिस्टर्स थे. सो वाई एम ब्रिंगिंग दिस अप इज़ कि आप वहाँ से वो पावर रिलेशन धीरे धीरे बढ़ना और देखना सीखते हो. तब आप वो भी आप बड़े होते हुए ये भी मॉडल करते हो. ठीक है, आप बोल रहे हो कि मैंने अपने बच्चों के बीच में भेदभाव नहीं करा, बट अगर मम्मी पापा के बीच में भेदभाव है, मदर इज़ समवन हु इज़ डिसरिस्पेक्टेड इन द फैमिली, बच्चा देख रहा है मदर, वुमन एंड मैन, फादर, उन दोनों को कैसे अलग से देखा जा रहा है, हाउ आर दे व्यूइंग. तो आप उसको बोल कितना भी लो, देयर इज़ समथिंग कॉल्ड सोशल लर्निंग. बैंड्यूरा की थ्योरी थी कि आप जो देखते हो आप वो भी थोड़ा सीखते हो. एंड नॉट जस्ट आप देखते हो वो सीखते हो, आप देख रहे हो किसी चीज़ के लिए किसी को पनिशमेंट मिल रही है, सेम चीज़ कोई और कर रहा है, आपको पनिशमेंट नहीं मिल रही. यू आर लर्निंग अबाउट व्हाट्स एक्सेप्टेबल इन व्हाट वेज. यू आर लर्निंग, जैसे फॉर एग्जाम्पल when you are again talking about power, there is, I think one thing that Mayank also brought up was that फिजिकल डिफरेंस एग्जिस्ट करता है. कभी किसी ने मना नहीं करा कि हाँ होता है, बहुत बार होता है कि मैन में बी प्रीडोमिनेंटली स्ट्रॉन्गर फिजिकली दैन वीमेन, दे हैव दैट फिजिक. बट आप उसको यूज़ कैसे करो इज़ इम्पॉर्टेंट. प्लस इन अ लॉट ऑफ कल्चर, लाइक इफ़ वी ब्रिंग इन पेट्रियार्की अगेन, if you see from that alpha male point of view, right? If you think the man is supposed to provide, if you think the man is supposed to protect, provide, और फिर suddenly आप कह रहे हो कि आपको नहीं करना है, but also at the same time अगर आप कह रहे हो कि आपको करना भी है और आप नहीं कर पा रहे हो तो तुम नामर्द हो, You know, that kind of emancipation that comes in, the kind of power you take away from someone. You've given so much power growing up, even when he's a young adult, when he's an adult, आपने suddenly उसकी power ले ली, तो वो कहाँ exert करेगा वो power? On someone weaker in his mind, someone who's perceived weaker. ये psychological terms में we also call something called displacement. And पहले इसको जब समझाया जाता था, उसको इस सेंस में समझाया जाता था कि जब पेरेंट्स घर आते हैं, जैसे बॉस ने पापा पे चिल्लाया, पापा बॉस पे थोड़ी चिल्ला सकता है, वो घर आके मम्मी पे चिल्लाएगा, मम्मी पापा पे वापस नहीं जा सकती, मम्मी बच्चे पे चिल्लाएगी. सो दिस इज हाउ दैट पावर साइकिल इज कंटिन्यूइंग. यू आर ऑलवेज गोइंग फॉर समवन वीकर, इवन व्हेन यू थिंक ऑफ बुलिंग. सो लाइक यू मेंशन दैट वो पावर डायनामिक्स जब हम असर्ट करते हैं, हम उसको विदाउट अंडरस्टैंडिंग जेंडर एंड सोसाइटी कर ही नहीं सकते. हम जब तक, even if you think about, let's say, someone who's so far advanced in terms of equality within males and females, but let's take this to another level कि एक trans woman है, right? If you don't see her as someone worthy, or you see her as weaker, and you think this is a person I don't feel equal to, or I feel like this life is not, like I don't need to respect this life, then it is very much easier for you to feel more powerful over this person. And then it's also about resources. A person who will have more resources in terms of not just strength, but if someone can get away with it, that also plays a big role in such scenarios, right? An upper caste woman will maybe have a little bit more power than a Dalit man in society, अगर एक sense में आप देखो, right? But still that male and female वाला equation जब वो power आता है, और my point of bringing this up is that you will see there are sometimes cases जहाँ पर, not cases but there are very much outrage और outcry और जल्दी आता है जब victim एक upper caste woman होती है. जैसे I was seeing one of the comments, I am not sure if this is you know, the right information about the victim has come out about this, but someone had mentioned that she is from an OBC caste. Now someone, and this was a reel I was watching actually, I'm not saying this is the truth, but I'm trying to explain a psyche point of view. Someone commented, हाँ तो अच्छा हुआ मर गई, कोटा वाली सीट में ही होगी ना. So you know, that's the kind of power dynamic that you have to keep thinking about in society. आप किस टाइप की society बना रहे हो. अगर equity नहीं आ रही तो equality का कोई मतलब ही नहीं है. अगर आपको लग रहा है कि आप opportunity दे रहे हो, that is not where it can end. You have to make a space for everyone to feel safe equally.
Mayank, what are your thoughts on this?
You know, I see, you know, while I'm not a subject matter expert, but whether, as long as we get to see society a lot, I see two reasons. One is education, and then other is negative reinforcements. Look, imagine a small town boy who is growing up watching all of this. What she described, you know, there's a power equation in the house, father getting you know, showdown with the boss, then doing the same in the family. He is constantly getting educated that, you know, there is a power equation. The sense of equality is not instilling. And then look what the other sources of information and media are doing to him. She's reading a reel where they say that OBC thi acha hua chali gayi. You know, she would occupy a seat. He's not getting a job. He's reading comments like this. Then look at the Bollywood movies that are being made. You know, extremely sexist, misogynistic. That is the content he's consuming all day long, right? So that's a negative reinforcement that's acting upon an already existing power equation in his mind, right? So what do you expect the outcome to be? And that's why I said in the beginning, what happens is a sensational case like this happens. We all talk about it, move on. The problem is moving on. And you know, I'm also picking up from the earlier question, that's exactly why we should not move on. Because moving on is only increasing the magnitude of the problem. It's only increasing the difficulty that we'll all face. So therefore, I think what we need to do is not move on, you know, continue to delve on it. Our boys and the entire society needs to be educated differently. Today, we not only have the regular media channels, but we have people such as you know, who are now making an attempt to reach out, right? These discourses need to reach to people. I think that's where I see it.
I have a couple of questions here, and then I would like to talk in detail about the Kolkata case. As a woman in India, I was in 5th grade when I was called out for wearing something on my birthday, with my class teacher literally telling me कि इसीलिए rape होता है country में. I was in 5th grade, and this is and I went to one of the best schools in my hometown. Even there, a 5th class girl, right? And it just continued. If a certain guy is teasing me, I'll be called to the staff room and scolded. That skirt here, what? And you change whatever you want.
They'll find something.
Something they'll find. And this is not just me. It was happening around me with other peers also, with my sisters also. And I was so appalled by that. And then I thought, ki, okay, maybe if I study hard and if I become this good girl, this sanskari girl, this will not happen. People will not call me out. But I'm so tired of living up to this idea of being a good girl that no matter what you do, once you deviate, anything wrong that happens to you will be justified. तुमने ये ना कुछ गड़बड़ करी होगी. Or maybe you have a lot of male friends, you talk to a lot of men, or content creator, already putting yourself out there and exposing yourself to men. That's why they'll comment. And if you read comments of various other female influencers also, fatherless behavior or no seal, no deal. These comments, and people are liking it. Or what is she bringing to the table? An overused hole. These kind of comments very, very normalized. And I unfortunately know people who are boosting these reels, knowing that these comments will come, they will get more engagement and more followers. बचपन से लेके अब तक ये हर एरिया में चल रहा है. आपको लगता है आप सक्सेसफुल हो जाओगे, आपके पास पावर आएगी, फिर लड़के या आपको कोई ऐसे बोलेगा नहीं. यू विल फाइनली बी द गुड गर्ल हु इज वर्दी ऑफ रिस्पेक्ट. सो व्हाट इज योर opinion on this idea of a good girl versus a bad girl, good boy sanskari boy versus a bad boy, and why is a woman who's bold in her lifestyle, who is able to bravely make choices, labeled as a slut or a little hoe, or if something happens to her is okay, justified because she's a little hoe, versus if a guy is like that, he's a player man bro, kaise score kiya bhai? Why is this happening? And how can actually change come about? That's the more important question.
Firstly, I'd just like to say I'm so sorry you went through that in the 5th grade. It's a very tender age. And I think for me also, or anyone who's listening for that matter, any girl, she will instantly resonate with how and what you described. Have you noticed that I'll just share a personal anecdote. When I was in the 5th grade, it's not at parallel, but that was the first time I heard someone abuse. And the first thing you hear is, I'm not going to say it, but it's all mother sister, right? And it is very confusing for any child that, okay, there are two men fighting here, why are they bringing other women in here? And what is it about? It's about violence against women. And today if you ask a lot of men and boys like our age, I would say, they would be like, अरे no, this is the way we say these things ना, ये तो बस part of conversation, इसका कुछ मतलब थोड़ी होता है. मतलब नहीं होता तो फिर आप बोलते क्यों? अरे ठीक है, फाइन, आप कह रहे हो आपके कल्चर का पार्ट हो गया है. कल्चर का पार्ट तो डाउरी भी था. अभी भी खैर वी नो केसेस हैपन. कल्चर का पार्ट चाइल्ड मैरिज भी था. कल्चर का पार्ट सती भी था. कल्चर का पार्ट तो ये भी था कि यू सेल ऑफ वुमेन एंड थिंग्स लाइक दैट. तो अब टू व्हाट एंड यू सिट डाउन एंड रिफ्लेक्ट कि आप कोई चीज़ किस भाव से, किस इमोशन से और क्यों बोलते हो. तो व्हेन यू आर टॉकिंग अबाउट दिस गुड गर्ल सिंड्रोम ऑल्सो, one thing that I have personally seen in my practice is that it's a very much a trauma response. It's because, and not just we are being specific to girls, yes, but I'm trying to explain that when there is a kind of an interpersonal trauma, this we call interpersonal violence or interpersonal trauma, when there is a conflict in relationships कि आपको वो like you said respect नहीं मिल रही, basic, right? This is something so should be given in relationships, जहाँ आप safety feel करो, respect feel करो, जहाँ आप equal feel करो, जहाँ पर आपको खुद से बनने में डर ना लगे, आपकी गलतियों को, आपकी एक छोटी गलती को आपका मतलब मेंटल ना बना दिया जाए. अब होता क्या है कि when someone does something to you, especially what I have seen, that when we are growing up as girls, what happens for us is this, that अच्छा हम 10 चीज़ें अच्छी करते हैं, good girl, good girl, good girl, like you said, एक चीज़ बुरी करी, bad girl, and that goes on for so long, right? And it keeps coming back to haunt us. आप स्कूल में एक गलती कर लो and that one teacher who's out to get all the girls sees you, आप कुछ भी कर लो, आप अपनी स्कॉलर्स जीत लो, आप बेस्ट बन जाओ स्कूल में, आप टॉपर हो, आप हेड गर्ल हो, इट वोंट मैटर टू हर. फॉर हर you are a blob with breasts and bumps, and you are enticing another male with your maybe even colored hair ties sometimes, right? So the thing is that the issue here is that when we are victims here in a way, right? When victims of trauma come in, they often feel कि अगर मैं better हो जाऊँ ना इस तरीके से तो ये मुझे कर लेंगे. Even in cases of, you will see, domestic violence, we are very eager to ask why didn't she leave, but there are many reasons to why a person cannot leave, and sometimes they are also physical in the sense कि आपको पता होगा कि फाइट एंड फ्लाइट रिस्पॉन्स होता है, 2 और रिस्पॉन्स होते हैं, फ्रीज एंड फॉन. फ्रीज भी आपने सुना होगा, फॉन मैं आपको बताऊंगी इससे गुड गर्ल से रिलेटेड है, क्योंकि फ्रीज इज पहले तो कि आपको लॉट ऑफ टाइम्स पीपल से चिल्लाई नहीं, कुछ कर रहे थे चिल्लाई क्यों नहीं एंड ऑल दैट. समटाइम्स इवन पीपल से एक, जब यू मे हैव हर्ड ऑफ दिस फ्रेज कॉल्ड प्लेइंग पॉसम, राइट? तो इट्स बेसिकली कि अगर आपके पास कोई प्रेडिटर आ रहा है, अगर आपके बॉडी के पास कोई रिसोर्सेज नहीं है, आप फ्रीज करोगे क्योंकि उसको लग रहा है अगर मैं डेड एक्ट करूँ तो मुझे कुछ होगा नहीं. Two is fun. In Highway, जब Alia Bhatt is shown that she develops not feelings, but there you can see that she's not feeling the way she's supposed to feel, like a victim may feel with someone who's kidnapped her.
Stockholm syndrome.
Exactly, Stockholm syndrome. पर होता क्या है ना, आपकी एवरीडे रिलेशनशिप्स में इट्स वेरी मुश्किल टू से कि आपका ये फॉन रिस्पॉन्स है या आपका ये स्टॉकहोम सिंड्रोम रिस्पॉन्स है, ऐसा कुछ, बिकॉज हमें सिखाया ही नहीं जाता ये सब. क्योंकि एंड इफ़ यू आर टॉकिंग अबाउट, आई थिंक यू वर टॉकिंग अबाउट रिफॉर्म्स इन एजुकेशन, आई विल टेल यू दैट ट्रॉमा इन्फॉर्म केयर विच आई हैव बीन टॉकिंग अबाउट अ बिट, ये इतना सिंपल है टू अंडरस्टैंड व्हेन यू डू. जैसे अभी मैंने आपको विंडो ऑफ टॉलरेंस बताया, मैंने आपको ये 4 रिस्पॉन्सेज बताया. अगर आपको लाइफ में इन चीज़ों के बारे में पहले से थोड़ा पता हो, आप कम से कम ये तो बता सकते हो ना कि मैं ये फील कर रही हूँ इस रीज़न से, लेट्स सी व्हाट आई नीड टू डू नेक्स्ट. आधा टाइम हमारी लाइफ ब्लेम में चली जाती है और शेम में, लाइक यू सेड, ये कि ओ मैं ऐसा क्यों कर रही हूँ, वाई एम आई टॉकिंग टू दिस पर्सन इवन दो दे आर डूइंग दिस टू मी, क्योंकि वो आपका सर्वाइवल रिस्पॉन्स है. You are not doing this कि like people pleasers we talk about, and good girl syndrome is very closely related. It is because आपको लग रहा है कि मैं खुद को बचाने के लिए जितनी अच्छी हो सकती हूँ मैं हूँ, because your survival is at stake.
Interesting that she spoke about Stockholm syndrome, but I want to ask you, I have a reverse question, right? कहाँ मिलती है ये गुड गर्ल की मैनुअल और कहाँ मिलता है ये आइडियल बिहेवियर का prescription? The difficulty is, see, and I completely second the feeling that you spoke about, that we go through so much inside us for our sheer upbringing, the education, even our schools, our teachers, constantly hammering this idea of a good girl or a good boy in us, that we forget that there is an essential individuality to all of us, right? And expression of oneself in whichever manner they want, in a society that still makes it safe for them to do it, is what we want. What is a state, and I don't want to get hyper technical, but अगर viewers को समझाने के लिए बहुत सरल शब्दों में, सरकार स्टेट के साथ हमारा ये कॉन्ट्रैक्ट होता है कि जी हम आपकी कोर्सिव पावर्स के सबड्यूड रहेंगे, टैक्स भी देंगे, पलट के आप हमें एक्सटर्नल और इंटरनल सेफ्टी और सिक्योरिटी देंगे. यही हमारा कॉन्ट्रैक्ट है विद द स्टेट. दैट्स हाउ अ स्टेट इज फॉर्म्ड. एक सॉवरेन के साथ हमारा यही कॉन्ट्रैक्ट होता है. दैट्स व्हाई गवर्नमेंट्स कम एंड गो, सॉवरेन रिमेन्स विद व्हिच वी हैव दिस this contract. So your question itself begs the question that are you saying that we are, even when I have to hear about you, what I'm hearing is that we are losing our individuality at a very early age, right? And there can be no more traumatic a discourse than this, right? So the more I feel about the trauma of that victim out there that we are here to speak about and the incident, I think the trauma is then shared by everyone in some manner. And I'm not saying that you are alone in this journey. You know, at some stages, I have also gone through it. She has also gone through it. So I think, other than social bullying and social killing of our individuality, what is happening is institutional killing of our individuality by this good girl syndrome. So I think, and therefore I think, somebody will have to pick up the cudgels and move forward and say, no, we are now ready as a country to pick up our individualities and run with it without having to fear, a rebuke or any violence towards our person, right? That's the bare minimum we are asking. If you turn the tables and see, we've normalized this fact so much कि तुम अच्छी लड़की बनोगी तो तुम्हारे साथ रेप नहीं होगा, whereas the normal is मैं जैसी भी हूं मेरे साथ रेप नहीं होगा. ये स्टेट और ये सोसाइटी की कल्पना हमने करी थी ना, हमारे संविधान के निर्माताओं ने करी थी. ये कल्पना तो कभी नहीं करी थी कि ये करोगे तभी होगा, क्योंकि फिर तो किताब में लिख देते. So I think the problem is the mindset. The mindset should be that the normalizing should be the other way around. That, acha, to, of course I understand at a certain stage, at a certain age in our lives, we never have the bandwidth to understand all of this and then talk about it. But I think it's our duty to educate the next generation and tell them that if somebody tells you that, since you've not been a good girl, rape hote hain, you have to ask, you have to denormalize this and say rape nahi hote hain in a safe society where people like you stand as guardians for me today, and then state and its machinery and every single individual and citizen will stand for each other for our safety, And I'm telling you, it would have been a very different situation. There is still a large mass that still talks and believes the same way. It's that little minority of people that needs to be retrained in their mind, and we have to renormalize this whole thing, right? And the unfortunate part is that little minority has taken over the mental setup of the majority. Not every man is committing rape, that's what I'm saying, also. But at the same time, I think that small minority mindset has taken over the larger mindset and leading to this good girl syndrome. I really wish, we turn this around.
Just adding on to this, so this story is going viral where, so basically one quote is here, she was wearing short clothes, that's why she was raped, and then another headline. I actually find that problematic. Why do you have to say that rape is bad? Because full कपड़ों में भी तो rape हुआ, इसलिए rape करना है. It is, as he said, universally bad. छोटे कपड़ों में भी हुआ होता, वो headline भी लगाओ, वो तब भी गलत है. It's just a bad thing to do. That needs to be normalized. These stories कि वो रात को rape होता है, justified. But headline is कि हाँ दिन में भी तो हुआ तो it's bad. You can't say कि it's bad because दिन में भी हो रहा है, full कपड़ों में भी हो रहा है. Either way वो गंदा है, वो गलत चीज़ हो रही है. Anyways.
Rape and clothes and the size of those clothes are two completely uncorrelated things. Relating them and normalizing this is the unfortunate part. That's what I would want to say.
So for girls who are watching you both, right, as experts, what do you think is the idea of a good girl? I would like both of you to say, if there is an idea.
I don't think there is one. I would say it's to be like he said, right? And he said it so beautifully. It's when you're talking about a good girl syndrome, it's like a mark of death of individuality is what you said, I think. So the entire idea of any identity is to liberate you. And if it's not doing that, then it's not an identity that is serving you. And then it means you have to have a conversation with yourself about the relationship you hold with that identity. So if you're a good girl, you feel like you're one, and you feel like, or you want to be one, just ask those questions. Why do you want to do it? What is going to change? What is serving out of it? What are you getting out of it? And is it worth losing your individuality over?
See, I would take a little liberty of tweaking this question. I would say, what is the idea of a good person? Or rather, what is the idea of a person? So I think I'll reiterate what I said. The idea of a person is to be who you are, without the fear of any consequence, especially any kind of violence to your person, right? Good or bad, right or wrong, we have laws defined for it in the country. There's a legislature making laws. We are all supposed to know the laws. So I would say be a good citizen. Don't violate the laws. Don't violate the personal space and being of other people. But other than that, be who you are. Good or bad, it doesn't matter. Who makes good or bad, I don't know. This is all very, very subjective. What may be good for me may be bad for you, or vice versa. So I think just be a person who believes in a nation together where all of us can be individuals in our own right without any fear of, being subjected to any kind of violence. What I feel.
Coming to the Kolkata tragedy that's happened, what is your take on the legal loopholes there, right? Because earlier it was said it's a suicide. Then, oh no, rape hua hai because media attention, and then the investigation started. What legal hopes did you observe there, and how do you think those can be worked upon?
Look, I'll be a little responsible in making comments here. While we're making journal comments so far and discussing things around the Heinous Act with anybody whatsoever, but when we're talking specifically of the Kolkata incident, the matter is currently sub judice. I must tell you that it is before the Honorable Supreme Court. The matter was heard today by the Honorable Court, and the court has also listed the matter now for a Thursday. But insofar as I am reading the media, I'm reading the reports, I'm reading whatever I'm able to read, I see multiple versions originating at different points in time. On the morning of the 9th, the first report, of course, is also subject to what, this all read in the newspapers and I don't have any first-hand information, was that there seems to be a suspected case of suicide. I think thereafter an inquest was done, and then it was realized that I think they figured that, it was a case of murder as well. And then one thing led to the other, then an autopsy, then, further investigation led to, the investigating teams realizing that there's also rape involved. And that's how the investigation progressed. But what really transpired, I have not heard the version. So, there was a version being put, but the Honorable Court did not hear it today, and they'll be hearing it on Thursday. So, the official version I don't have, frankly. But, rather than talking about this specific case and the investigation, I can tell you that there are a lot of things that investigation, requires in a matter like this. Whether the crime scene was preserved, I'm also getting to hear that, there was contamination of the crime scene. There was no sealing of the crime scene. There was some, in fact, construction done for the next 2 days on the crime scene.
Renovation started.
All of this I'm hearing in the news, but I think let's hold our horses like, we were discussing. As responsible citizens, let the right information through right channels come in. And, of course, anything that you say or do should not sound or look like politically correct or incorrect as well. I think we are here to seek the truth for the unfortunate victim. So I think at this point in time, multiple versions are coming in, including the ones that I've put before you. So early to say what really went wrong. Let's get the facts together and from the right sources, and I think that then it'll be worthy to comment.
But with regards to workplace safety here, right? She was a doctor on duty, and this happened there. Do you think some reforms need to take place there as well?
See, there is definitely a lot of states have legislations about, deeming hospitals as safe zones. So it's not that this is, and not just hospital, you're talking about workplaces in general. I think there is clearly a need to make every place a safe place. This should not have transpired. I'm told that there was, some, the current accused who was arrested. I think he was also employed in the same hospital, as if what I've understood is correct. So, there has to be CCTV cameras, there has to be sensitization. But, I beg myself a question that, is this really about workplace safety? The Honorable Supreme Court today has constituted a task force about general safety of medical professionals and medical facilities. But, looking at the news and the reports that I'm getting, I wonder, was it about a lapse in workplace safety? Or was it an act, a complete inhuman, barbaric act by one person on another person? Regardless, because, you may have CCTV cameras, you may have a very robust mechanism of safety, you may have every other facility. But if a co-worker decides to, conduct or, get into an act like this, then where do we stop? We cannot make prisons out of workplaces, for sure. But at the same time, not that I'm advocating that these places should not have strengthen, they should not strengthen their safety infrastructure. But I'm also saying that, I wonder, was that a lapse of safety or was that a lapse of a person? Right. That's what is...
If it's okay, I'll just first bring in a little context to what you were also sharing regards to workplace safety, especially in a health setup and public health setups. First thing is that let's make a distinction between protection and safety. What I've been hearing from reports, I know we've been talking about we don't feel safe. That is very much true. But like even during the COVID pandemic, the Indian Medical Association had to actually put out a press release for the safety of their doctors, because the press release basically said, and it was such an urgency that you could hear, though it was a written text, that मतलब उनके साथ ऐसा हो रहा है कि इस समय जब इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर फेल हो रहा है, फिर भी डॉक्टर्स आर द वन हु आर एट रिस्क, राइट? इट इज़ ऑलवेज द डॉक्टर्स दैट आर अटैक. तो उस समय भी अब 2 एक्ट्स एग्जिस्ट करते हैं, CRPD आई थिंक, एंड देयर इज वन मोर एक्ट, आई एम नॉट श्योर. बट उधर क्या है, वहाँ अकाउंटेबिलिटी मैकेनिज्म्स जो हैं दे आर नॉट प्रॉपरली इन प्लेस. कि जब तो हो क्या रहा था उस समय ड्यूरिंग कोविड, आई एम टेलिंग, कि व्हेन अ डॉक्टर वाज ट्राइंग टू फाइल अ कंप्लेंट, बोथ द डॉक्टर एंड द पुलिस मैन whoever is involved were having difficulty in filing the complaint because of the nature of it, something like that. तो यहाँ हम 2 चीज़ों के बारे में बात करें, प्रोटेक्शन एंड सेफ्टी. तो जब हम ऐसी बात कर रहे हैं, व्हेन अ क्राइम लाइक दिस एग्जिस्ट, वी हैव टू थिंक ऑफ बोथ दीज थिंग्स. प्रोटेक्शन इज़ कि एक डॉक्टर जो 36 आवर्स की शिफ्ट के बाद वो वहाँ रेस्ट कर रही है, एंड इट इज़ नॉट अनकॉमन इन डॉक्टर्स. इफ़ यू नो, लाइक इफ़ यू हैव फ्रेंड्स और इफ़ यू जस्ट वॉच cinema outside, or if you know people outside who are in public health or hospital administration in general, it's pretty common to work long shifts and sleep at the hospital. When you're talking about maybe safe spaces and protection, maybe we are thinking of novel solutions कि हम ऐसे जहाँ already infrastructure कम है वहाँ एक space कैसे बनाए कि और कोई नहीं आ सकता, चाहे आपको किस level की authorization हो. Let's say this is only for these kinds of doctors, but then again that question comes, okay, male doctors, female doctors, things like that. So like I said, that protection and safety mechanism come in. Now when you're talking about what goes on in the psyche of someone like this, like I mentioned initially, in that study they didn't find कि हाँ एक ऐसा इंसान है उसके, but हाँ there are risk factors. जैसे एक होता है कि आप ऐसी पोर्नोग्राफी देख रहे हो जो रेप हैवी हो, या मतलब जहाँ पे रेप से ज़्यादा आई वुड से जहाँ कंसेंट नहीं होता, because उसमें भी कोई आप if there is a pornographical video, it's not always necessary they will call it rape, and how they word these things is also very different. तो वो सब भी बहुत matter करता है. तो when there is someone like this, the one is this. Second is, like I was talking about initially as well, that आपका peer group, how you or even how a man views a woman. Are they viewing you as a person or a sexual object? Are they viewing you as a person with their own sets of, personhood? Or are you someone, an extension of another man, a father, a brother, a husband, whoever, a family system? Or who are you, basically, right? And third is definitely how, actually with sexual pornography also, rape pornography also, there was in this very study, what was very interesting to note, that with these same men, they had administered trying to understand what is the level of empathy, and whoever had high levels of empathy were at a way lower risk, very very low is what I'm trying to say, to do such heinous acts, right? My question to this study was, how do we know? That empathy like this kind, and when you're watching something like this, I have this question definitely. But from what I've understood from the literature, from my experience, from working in different setups, is that empathy is a predictor of these things not happening. And empathy mean कि आप दूसरे को as a person देखो.
पर empathy आती कहाँ से? अगर बचपन से ही women are treated as objects, and you see comments like these, your friends are that boys locker room talk, things like these happening, वो empathy आएगी कहाँ से?
Exactly. So there is this very interesting thing called restorative justice. There was this psychologist who had talked about she had been working with the victim, and she and her family never felt okay, even though he was convicted, this person who was the who was he was the perpetrator, he was convicted, but they never felt a sense of relief, you know. And I think Mayank was talking about that psychological and sociological safety and relief after something like this has happened. So restorative justice, when you bring it into the picture, is about bringing not just the family with the realities of what has happened, but the perpetrator of what you have done to this family. Like we keep like I think you were initially talking about that the judicial system also needs to see that that line that you said, that the saint one, and
Yeah, every saint has a past and sinner has a future.
right. So when you think about every sinner having a future, it's very important, I would say, for the sinner to come to terms with whose future they have destroyed. That is how the intergroup contact, it's a theory given by Allport, and this was used. So it's not that suddenly discrimination across groups has dissipated to the level it has. अभी भी है, ऐसा नहीं कह रही नहीं है, but definitely we see a little bit more tolerance in life. तो वो intergroup contact theory पे based is so important for a perp like this to come into contact with what he has done, to demand accountability. जब आप किसी को जेल भेज देते हो या इवन कैपिटल पनिशमेंट, आप अकाउंटेबिलिटी कहाँ से ला रहे हो? आपने क्यों करा? आपको क्या लगता है आप क्यों कर सकते हो ऐसा? These are important questions that we need to ask the men in our lives, whether they are perpetrating at this level or whether small things like तुम रात को बाहर क्यों जा रही हो? Because this is where it's starting, right?
So, Mayank, when someone commits a crime like this, right, people love to say ki death penalty and all of that. According to you, where should the focus be? Should it be on the punishment? Should it be on prevention of such crimes? Or should it be, as she said, on restorative justice?
Look, I think the last bit to be looked into is punishment. I'm not saying ignore it. But I think rightfully the focus should shift on, making sure the entire process of investigation and the trial is efficient. And of course, along the way, look, last mein restorative justice nahi aata, as I understand from what also she is saying. I think it's a process that happens along the way. There was a time in our legal system that in a sessions tribal case, the victim was not even allowed to be a part of the matter. They were just sitting outside watching what is happening. It's a state case then. State ladta hai victim ki taraf se, because it's a crime against the society, contextually and conceptually speaking. Now recently the Honorable Supreme Court in a very landmark judgment said that the victim should have unbridled participatory rights. Sometimes, having what the victim wanted to say before the court leads to, a relief of a different kind, a psychologically and pathologically different experience for the victim. Victim cannot be an outsider in the criminal justice system. So I think the restorative part of the justice happens along the way when the process is efficient, when the victim has a say. But if you ask me the focus areas, that should clearly be the efficiency of the process. The faster a perpetrator of a crime like this meets justice, most of the time punishment, whether life or capital, becomes insignificant. The fact that you do something like this and the wheels of justice will churn faster and finer is, I think, what all of us as society look up to.
Mayank, for the benefit of the audience,
Yes.
Can you explain to them the importance of the concept of personal autonomy and consent?
So I'll try to put it in a manner that all of us understand, and if you find it a little funny or icky or dark, let me know. When they're not expecting it, they will all understand consent. I think that's the simplest form of how I would want men to understand consent, right? Because I think the disequilibrium that I see in the society, the problem is some men are, unfortunately, but most of us are not privy with the concept of consent. Consent is written all over the place when you need to be, you can only ignore it if you want to deliberately. So I would say the concept of consent is simply put, no means a no. you know, and
नाक
err
के
on the
पीछे
side
तो
of
हाँ छिपी होती है,
huh?
बट नाक के पीछे तो हाँ छिपी होती है.
So I'll tell you know, the audience here that err on the side of caution. A no means a no, and अगर ना में हाँ छुपी है और ना में ना छुपी है, you know, it is, you can all figure it out. It is not rocket science. If a girl is saying no or vice versa, it is not difficult to understand. All that you have to do is, you know, think about the person on the other side and you know, conduct yourself accordingly. But you're right, you know, since you've asked this question, I'll also get deeper into understanding how to explain it better, the concept of consent. But personal autonomy, I'll surely say that, you know, an invasion of privacy of another person, getting into the private bubble of another person, you know, should be avoided at all costs. Even if you're close, you are pally, you know, hang out often, but the concept of a personal bubble of a person has to be respected at all times. And even jokingly, if you're told not to interfere with the personal space of another person, you should back off. And I'll tell all my young viewers also that you know, err on the side of caution when it comes to personal space and personal autonomy. You know, these are things that personal autonomy is actually the starting point of you know, of consent. And if you respect personal autonomy, you will mostly never make a mistake with consent.
Bhavya, do you have any thoughts on this?
I think in the last you've put it very beautifully, and I was just going to come in and say that, like he said, like it definitely goes both ways, right? And I feel like in our culture, specifically, there is, you know, अगर आप सोचो इस बारे में, we most of us would have one roommate growing up, you know, which is usually our brother or sister. Same sisters is different, same brothers is different, brother sister is different, but there are different ways मतलब हमारे पेरेंट्स सिखाते हैं बाउंड्रीज. और वो बाउंड्रीज समझना इतना इम्पॉर्टेंट होता है क्योंकि आप ये नहीं समझ पाते हो कि किसकी बाउंड्री कहाँ शुरू कहाँ ख़त्म है. एंड आई वुड से कि अगर लाइक मयंक सेड, अगर लग रहा है समझ नहीं आ रहा, पूछो. सबसे ईजी चीज़ है लाइफ में. नहीं आ रहा समझ, समवन's giving you mixed signals, and a lot of times it does happen, like when you think about emotional cheating or when you think about gaslighting and things like that, boundaries sometimes are not clear, and there are times जब आपको दूसरा बंदा ऐसा बिलीव कराए कि नहीं मैं आपकी बाउंड्री फॉलो कर रहा हूँ, आप गलत बोल रहे हो, आप मुझे समझा नहीं पा रहे हो, या समथिंग लाइक दैट. तो इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट कि आप go back into your body. You know, like when I was explaining the window of tolerance or the 4 responses, आपकी बॉडी में जो इंस्टिंक्ट्स है आपको कभी गलत नहीं बताएंगे. ट्रस्ट योर बॉडी. अगर आपको लग रहा है कि कोई आपको छू रहा है, जैसे हम बैड टच गुड टच की बात करते हैं, बच्चों को पता होता है हमेशा कि हमें कोई अच्छे से नहीं छू रहा है. शायद उनके पास वोकैबुलरी ना हो, शायद उनको ना समझ आ रहा हो कि वो बताना क्या चाहते किसी और को, बट उनकी बॉडी में दे आर फीलिंग कुछ गलत हो रहा है. यू नो, एंड समटाइम्स व्हाट हैपेंस इज व्हेन यू फील अनसेफ, नो, आप एकदम से ना ऐसे बल्ब नहीं होता, इट फील्स लाइक, और मे बी लाइक अ बेल रिंगिंग, नो समथिंग्स हैपनिंग. ट्रस्ट दैट. Don't think that, you know, someone's if I'm being too much, I'm being overly emotional, or there may be different instances where maybe this is not helping you in different contexts, but when it comes to body consent, and I'm talking about sexual violence, always trust your gut.
But Bhavya, in the case of women,
Yeah.
why is the feeling of obligation more strong as compared to consent? That, oh, my husband wants to do this, or my boyfriend wants to do this, my partner wants to do this, so that takes priority over, do I want to do this?
If you think about it, जब हम ग्रो अप कर रहे होते हैं हमारे कल्चर्स में भी, अभी यू हैड गिवन मी एग्जाम्पल्स, मयंक गेव मी एग्जाम्पल्स कि यू नो आपके साथ जो हुआ था कि अगर किसी लड़के ने आपको छेड़ा, आपको बुलाया जाता है. वी आर कॉन्स्टेंटली हेल्ड रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर समवन एल्सेज एक्शन. तो हमें लगता है किसी का बुरा मूड हो, किसी का अच्छा मूड हो, हम रिस्पॉन्सिबल हैं. मेरी मदर इन लॉ इज़ अपसेट, मैं रिस्पॉन्सिबल हूँ. मेरे हस्बैंड इज़ अपसेट, मैं उसको सेक्स नहीं दे रही हूँ, मैं रिस्पॉन्सिबल हूँ. मैं चाहती हूँ नहीं चाहती हूँ, वो सेकेंडरी क्वेश्चन बन जाता है. वाई? एंड इट्स ऑल्सो बिकॉज इन आवर सोसाइटी अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम्स, श्योर लाइक आई सेड कि इंटेलेक्चुअल इक्वालिटी फिर भी आ गई है कि हाँ मेरी बच्ची बड़े हो के ये बनेगी वो बनेगी, बट क्या हम उनको इक्वल जगह देते हैं हमेशा टू असर्ट देयर ऑटोनॉमी एंड पर्सनहुड, लाइक Mayank also mentioned, डू वी हैव अ पर्सनहुड टू असर्ट? क्या हमें पता है हम कौन हैं बिफोर दूसरों के लिए हमें क्या करना है? डू वी नो हु वी आर बियॉन्ड द सोशल रोल्स गिवन टू अस? तो अगर आप अपने सोशल रोल्स में इतना घुसे हुए हो तो इट बिकम्स वेरी डिफरेंट टू से डिफिकल्ट टू से नो, बिकॉज आपको लगता है यू हैव नो राइट टू से नो.
I want to dig deeper into the idea of consent, right? And post something like this happens, what kind of psychological trauma does the victim go through, and how do they become normal? Does that ever happen?
That's a loaded question. See, there is likely that, I'll give you a brief overview of how mental disorders are said to be working at place here, okay? And before I move ahead, I just want to give a disclaimer कि mental disorder doesn't just mean कि आप पागल हो in the way people perceive कि you have lost it, you are not able to do anything, आपकी functioning loss है, things like that. Mental disorder, I would like to say it in a manner कि आपके साथ कुछ ऐसा हुआ है, एंड अगर हम ट्रॉमा की बात करें, आपके साथ कुछ ऐसा हुआ है जिसने आपकी लाइफ बदल दी. अब क्या होता है, ट्रॉमा के लिटरेचर में भी हम ये बात करते हैं, ट्रॉमा का ये मतलब नहीं, जैसे होता क्या है, अब लेट्स टॉक अबाउट अ बिगर लेवल पे ट्रॉमा. अगर एक अर्थक्वेक है उसमें मल्टीपल विक्टिम्स है, राइट, बट यू विल सी देयर आर वेरिएशंस विद इन दीज विक्टिम्स ऑल्सो. कुछ लोग होंगे वो दूसरों की मदद कर रहे हैं, दे आर ऑल्सो अफेक्टेड. ऐसा नहीं है कि उनके साथ ही अर्थक्वेक नहीं हो रहा, उनके साथ भी अर्थक्वेक हो रहा है. तो होता क्या है कि लाइक वी टॉक अबाउट इंडिविजुअल फैक्टर्स एट प्ले होते हैं, सोशल फैक्टर्स एट प्ले होते हैं, बायोलॉजिकल फैक्टर्स एट प्ले होते हैं. तो अगर एक विक्टिम है, ये भी असर्ट करना, अब क्या होता है, कुछ विक्टिम्स विल भी, उनके पास लेट्स से सोशल सपोर्ट भी है, लेट्स से बायोलॉजिकली दे आर प्रिटी हेल्दी, इससे पहले उनके साथ ऐसा कुछ ट्रॉमेटिक इवेंट नहीं हुआ है, या फिर दे आर प्रिटी लाइक ऐसी चीज़ें पहले इतना हो चुका है कि वो बहुत रेजिलियंट है कि इस मोमेंट पे वो तंग आ चुके हैं, वो दे वांट टू मेक अ चेंज, दे आर इन दैट स्पेस ऑलरेडी. सो व्हेन सच अ थिंग हैपन्स, इट्स वेरी डिफिकल्ट टू से हर विक्टिम की ट्रैजेक्ट्री सेम होती. और वो नॉर्मलाइजेशन जो भी हम बात करें, इट इज़ पॉसिबल कि आपके लिए अलग वेज में वो मैनिफेस्ट हो, राइट. हो सकता है कि एक चीज़ ये भी होती है कि काफ़ी बार ये बात करी जाती है, जैसे अगर लेट्स से कि समथिंग लाइक दिस हैज हैपेंड, it is possible that you never come back to this what we call a pre-morbid personality. Before an onset of some kind of a problem, there you used to be a certain way in different terms, maybe personality wise, mood wise, things that you like, things that you would do. हो सकता है आपका नॉर्मल का डेफिनेशन बदल जाए. अब ये फॉर द गुड भी हो सकता है, फॉर द वर्स भी हो सकता है. इट विल बी अकॉर्डिंग टू हाउ यू वर्क थिंग्स थ्रू फॉर योर सेल्फ. सो आई डोंट वॉन्ट टू गो आउट ऑन अ लिम एंड जनरलाइज दिस फॉर द ऑडियंस, बिकॉज एवरी वंस रिस्पॉन्स इज वेरी डिफरेंट. सम पीपल, देर इज नथिंग रॉन्ग विद समवन इफ they are feeling after something like this has happened, they are just feeling angry, or they are feeling that they are going to take back their revenge. इसमें कुछ गलत नहीं है, क्योंकि आपकी बॉडी कैसे रिस्पॉन्ड करेगी, आपके यूनिक इंडिविजुअल लाइफ एक्सपीरियंसेस, स्ट्रेसेस वगैरह क्या रहे हैं, दे विल ऑलवेज डिटरमिन दिस.
But for someone who cannot afford therapy or a mental health professional, what should they do about it? Because stating facts here, a lot of महिला सुधार केंद्र और जो इनके सपोर्ट के लिए होते हैं, they are brothels where politicians go. So वो कहाँ जाए?
Right. So I'll tell you one more thing. I've worked previously in, I'm not gonna name things, but I've worked in a respite home, you can say, which is a public space. It's not a private entity. And the issue here is that again, it sadly enough, our conversation, both sadly and maybe we are finding solutions as we're talking, but it will always come back to the fact how people perceive things. So in this place there was every amenity available, ठीक है. ग्रुप सपोर्ट प्लेसेस भी थे, थेरेपिस्ट भी थे, फ्री थेरेपिस्ट, नॉट कि आपको पे करना है. प्रॉब्लम यहाँ आती है कि जो इंचार्ज होते हैं ना, जिनके पास पावर है उस इंस्टीट्यूशन में, जैसे साइकोलॉजिस्ट कैन बी एक्सटर्नल, दे कैन बी थ्रू एन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, जिनके पास पावर है उनको सेंसिटाइज करना अबाउट ट्रॉमा इज़ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. आई वुड से दैट. तो मैं ऑनेस्टली कहूँ, आई वुड से अ मेंटल हेल्थ प्रोफेशनल का काम तब आता है जब आप बहुत ही ऐसे केसेस में काम करो जहाँ पर कम्युनिटी सपोर्ट से हेल्प नहीं हो जा सकती. कम्युनिटी सपोर्ट इन माई ओपिनियन इज़ रियली रियली इंपॉर्टेंट. लाइक आई एम ऑल्सो पब्लिक हेल्थ रिसर्चर, सो आई हैव सीन with my own eyes how much having a community, having a support is helpful. तो आजकल आप देखोगे even now जो protests हो रहे हैं, you know, women are claiming the safe spaces at night. Even in Gurgaon this has happened yesterday. तो इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टू फाइंड अ कम्युनिटी टू हेल्प योर सेल्फ. एंड होता क्या है कि जब आपके साथ ऐसा कुछ होता है आपको लगता है कि आप अकेले हो, ये सिर्फ आपके साथ हुआ है, आपके साथ क्यों हुआ है, कैसे हुआ है. ऑल ऑफ दिस, द सैड रियलिटी इज देयर आर मेनी मोर लाइक यू. And the part that helps here is that within that solidarity, that safe space is the place where all of you together learn resilience. You also learn that okay, how can we help each other. Because होता क्या जब आप अपने बारे में सोच रहे हो तो you may have heard this कि you will always give a friend better advice in a similar situation as you. सो इट इज़ बिकॉज जब आप पे बात आती है ना, आपके थॉट्स इतने जम्बल्ड होते हैं, विच इज़ ऑल्सो हाउ अ थेरेपिस्ट कम्स इन टू अ पिक्चर अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम. बट आई एम ट्राइंग टू से कि जहाँ पर ये रिसोर्स अवेलेबल नहीं है, जहाँ थेरेपी एक्सपेंसिव है, और मैं आपको ऑनेस्टली बताऊँ बहुत ऐसी जगह होती है जहाँ थेरेपी 1-to-1 काम ही नहीं करती. नॉट एवरी वन इज़ हेल्प बाई थेरेपी इज़ वेरी सिंपल टू बी एक्सप्लेन. सब
I have it might be a nonsensical question, but I was watching this documentary around rapes of prostitutes. So that was around the idea that if you're getting something in exchange for sex or something else, if you're getting money or a promotion or anything, consent गई खाड़ में. वहाँ पे consent का क्या idea होता है कि I paid you for this, so service तो दो अब, या I'm promising a promotion.
I just want to volunteer here. So there are two elements to rape as defined under law also. Consent is one, willingness is another.
Oh, these are two separate.
Yes, and the way the section is worded is, when you do any act of depravity against the person of a woman, against her will and without her consent. तो उसकी इच्छा और उसकी सहमति दो अलग अलग चीज़ें हैं. सो आप उसकी सहमति ऑब्टेन कर सकते हैं कैसे? इफ आई पुट समबडी इन हार्म्स वे, समबडी क्लोज टू यू, आपकी सहमति तो मैंने अटेम कर ली, इच्छा कैसे करूंगा? सो विल एंड कंसेंट आर टू डिफरेंट थिंग्स, एंड देयरफॉर and when you said rape on a sex worker also is a real thing, because there may be sahmati but there is no ichha, and therefore will and consent are two very very different concepts and recognized under law.
I'm so glad I asked this.
So the section is very very carefully worded. If you read it, it's I think the new 69, the earlier 375 of the IPC, now in the BNS. So it talks about both these things.
This brings me to the idea of men literally saying, not all men are like this. हमें क्यों बदनाम कर रहे हो? What are your thoughts on that?
But किसने मर्दों को बदनाम किया है? All one is discussing here is the fact that what rape means to a victim, what should be done, and I don't think anybody is labeling men wrong per se. And neither I don't think that's the intent also.
Then Bhava, why do you think men are getting so defensive? Instead of literally acknowledging this is bad and it happens, they are like, सब ऐसे नहीं होते हैं.
I'm not sure I'm equipped to answer the why, but I'll just say 2-3 things that are coming to my mind. One is that, not all men, but yes, all women. Every woman I know, I have heard some or the other instance, चाहे वो किस भी magnitude पे, where she has been in some or the other way violated by a man. चाहे वो स्कूल में किसी का ब्रा स्ट्रैप ऐसे खींच के हो, या एक घटिया कमेंट जिससे उनकी like in school it used to happen a lot that you say one bad thing about a girl resembling anything to that she's a slut or a hoe, her high school's career is gone, right? So men get defensive because जब men पूरा टाइम ये बात करते हैं ना कि औरतें ऐसी होती हैं, औरतें वैसी होती हैं, तो तब जब उनको ये लगता है कि हम भी उसी रीज़न से कह रहे हैं, यू नो, मैन से दीज थिंग्स लाइक इन माई, दिस इज़ नॉट माई व्यू एज अ प्रोफेशनल, आई एम कमिंग इन एज अ पर्सन राइट नाउ हियर, कि मेरे पर्सनल लाइफ में मैंने जो ऑब्जर्व करा है, when men are saying these things ki women are like this, women are like that, they want us to take it as a joke. But the problem is the things that happen to us are not a joke. So when we say things about men, or when we say कि हाँ you know नहीं मेरे साथ ऐसा हुआ है, मेरी फ्रेंड साथ भी हुआ है, काफ़ी लड़के, इवन काफ़ी आप बोलो, they get very defensive, because I think यहाँ पर I would also like to come back to the window of tolerance bit. उनको बचपन से सिखाया है कि men are honorable, you know, men are providers, protectors, like it's, when you come to it, it's about this identities clashing, right? कि अरे how can it be that I am a man, she's saying this about me, I am not like this. So it's kind of like holding up to that mirror कि मेरे ही you know identity के लोग exist करते हैं जो ये सब कर रहे हैं, और बहुत ज़्यादा exist करते हैं. दूसरी पॉइंट ये है कि यू नो लाइक आई वाज रीडिंग दिस कॉमिक आई थिंक येस्टरडे, एंड उसमें ये था दैट हाउ मेन वांट वुमेन टू टॉक अबाउट इंस्टेंसेस ऑफ रेप स्लैश सेक्शुअल ट्रॉमा, एंड यू नो व्हाट दिस हैपेंड विद मी, और बट मुझे पता है आई डिडंट मीन टू लाइक ट्रिगर यू, बट मेरे साथ ऐसा हुआ तो मुझे बहुत लगा, बट दैट डजंट मीन दैट यू आर अ प्रॉब्लम, यू आर अ नाइस गाय, बट नहीं वो उस लड़के ने ऐसे करा. सो you know, bringing the idea here was that when we talk to men about this, there is that again identity and ego clash happening, because they are not sure that if they are not this person that they've been told to be, who they are. That is my personal opinion.
I forgot to add this bit while we were talking about how it's actually an act of power. Where again the comment section, right? Or when let's say someone puts on a story about some political view, people who don't agree, men will create fake accounts and comment things like बाहर निकल बताता हूँ, तेरा एड्रेस मुझे पता है यार, XYZ or whatever. Another instance that I remember is that this very senior official was on duty and some random goons just came to her and said कि बगल में हमारे खेत हैं, अभी तेरी रेड पड़वाते हैं अभी. A powerful woman, vulnerable because of her gender, by some random goons. So it's such a fucked up mentality anyway. So we were talking about two things, right? First was lawyer kaise mile, and secondly, what landmark changes legally do you think we can expect in the future that would help victims of such cases?
Look, so like I was saying that I trust our honorable courts quite a bit to, you know, to be sensitive, to be able to understand, you know, what the matter has been, and to assess the entire case, and the courts are empowered also. And there is of course a legal aid that comes to the, you know, comes to the help of those who cannot afford a good lawyer. So I think since there is majesty of the courts there, you know, I would not say that anybody who does not or cannot afford a good lawyer will not get justice. So I think, you know, we can trust our legal system to give them justice. Having a good lawyer only, you know, gives you a little more assistance, gives you a little more, you know, strength in the courtroom. But whether that exists or not, I think the courts in all their majesty are there to do justice, and with or without a lawyer in a manner like this, I have seen our courts being very, very proactive, right? The second question that you ask is about
Landmark changes legally.
what are the landmark changes? So, you know, on top of my mind, I think the biggest changes that need to be made are are through police reforms and investigative reforms. Look, investigation forms the bedrock of any kind of crime that takes place. If the matter is investigated well, then there is a high likelihood that the matter will be tried well, and then the guilty will be booked. It all begins with investigation. So I think first and foremost, the most important bit is the legal reform, is the investigation, is the police reforms, I'm sorry, where the investigation part of the policing has to be strengthened. And, you know, it's also my personal recommendation that in every district, or at least a sub-district level, there has to be a special hand-picked group of policemen and women who would come forward to investigate in any case like this from that sub-district and make sure that the crime scene is investigated well, the forensic people are coordinated with well, and there is a timely investigation that gets concluded and reaches the court in the form of a charge sheet. I think, personally asking, that's the first and foremost reform I would like to see before anything else moves on. It's good to make lofty statements about what else can change, but I think grassrooted what needs the most attention.
And in cases like the Kolkata case, where the political influence seems to be hindering the processes, what can be done there? Can anything be done there, first of all?
Look, I would say that, like I said before, that all of this currently is through social media and some other informal channels. We don't have the real picture. So, and the more we keep the debate or the discussion less political and more reformative, more educative, I think that's the best way to go forward. Commenting on which political party did what, see, politics is done for politics. So I would rather not know what's going on there.
And Abhavya, we spoke about how victims, the trauma that they go through. What is the mentality of criminals and how can they be helped, if at all they can be helped?
I think one is, like we were talking a bit about restorative justice. Now that comes at a time when the perp is, convicted. The thing is that when you're going into a system, right? And I think, like, I was seeing all these reels coming up ki, like there's this very famous person who posted a reel कि जो rapist है जब वो चला जाता है जेल में उसके साथ क्या होता है, which is the same thing happening to them once again, and it's being done by the other inmates, kind of a thing. And that is a big problem within the understanding of what's happening. Plus, what I feel is that when you think about the mindset, like we've been talking a bit about the role of gender, the role of society. So it makes, see, for example, this person that we've been talking about, this person who's been held responsible for now, like we were talking initially, he's had 3 difficult marriages and actually a history of violence. So when you are in a society where there is violence against women happening, the problem is, वो movie नहीं थी थप्पड़, उसने एक थप्पड़ भी कैसे मारा. तो इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट कि आप नींव में पकड़ना शुरू करो ऐसी चीज़ें. एंड होता क्या है कि हमारे पब्लिक हेल्थ सिस्टम्स एंड लाइक मयंक सेड कि हमारे जुडिशियल सिस्टम भी बहुत ओवरवर्कड है, ओवरबर्डन्ड है. एंड सो इज़ द केस विद द पब्लिक हेल्थ सिस्टम इज़ व्हाट आई वाज कमिंग टू. एंड सो इज़ दिस इज़ द ट्रूथ फॉर मेनी ऑफ आवर सिस्टम्स, राइट. तो द थिंग इज़ कि जब हमें शुरू प्रिवेंशन से करना होगा. ऑफकोर्स देयर इज़ अ स्पेस कि हाँ, अब जब जेल में एक ऐसे इतने सारे लोग हैं, मे बी देर आर डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ सपोर्ट ग्रुप्स. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, पहले सेक्स एडिक्शन को रिकग्नाइज नहीं करते थे, राइट. अब सेक्स एडिक्शन अगर रिकग्नाइज है, डू वी हैव इन द कंट्री सम एक्सपर्ट्स हु कैन लेंड अ सपोर्ट ग्रुप where that shame can be untangled with these perps of doing such heinous crimes. And see, I think Mayank said it rightly initially that they deserve a fair trial. Because owing to being a human being. So like, and he said that every sinner has a future. So that future calls upon for some systems of, I would say, people who may be mental health professionals, people who are adept at creating safe spaces for these people also to be safe in their own selves. Because for you to be experiencing such negative thoughts, and I'm not saying that that everyone will show remorse. I'm also not saying that a lot of people, I think someone had also mentioned that this person themselves was like, I don't regret doing anything. Though we don't know anything now, he's not been tried yet. But when the mentality is as such, you have to really first ask, where is this coming from? And though we know all of these, from studies and everything, we have to first ask this person why.
But let's say we understand where they're coming from, upbringing, society, everything. This action, I believe, is not a planned action कि वो सुबह उठ के बोलता है आज जाके रेप करूँगा. It's a heat of the moment thing, right? उस moment में what switches in their brain? Is it anger? Is it lust? What is it that translates those thoughts into violent action?
See, the trigger can be anything, right? It could be, like you said, anger. It could be lust. But to be honest, of what I have understood is that it's not a crime of passion like people used to say before. It's about holding power over someone else's body whom you have in the past been able to say कि I can do whatever I want with you, and अब वो आप नहीं कर सकते हो, right? जैसे अब for example in the past, I'm going way back now, that I think this was in South India. So there is a caste of people, and anyway, like in lower caste, people used to the upper caste Hindus would not allow the lower caste Hindus to wear the women wear cover their breasts. They had to bare their chest, because see, they are viewing all of this as a ploy, as a weapon. Sex is weaponized in this context. Becomes a way to commit something violent. It's not about love, it's not about emotion. Emotion may be a trigger to do something, but it's about control. So when you're thinking about control, then it becomes कि अगर आपको किसी को reform करना, आपको ये समझना है कि why do they want to control someone, why do they think they can control someone, what would it mean to not control someone. Because आपने क्या ये question भी करा है कि अगर आप control नहीं कर रहे हो तो आप कौन हो, right? And also feeling coming into terms with your own personhood, except for that identity of that toxic male, or like for example this, I think Andrew Tate, right? A lot of men are being told what not to do, but उनको ये भी बताने की ज़रूरत है कि आपको क्या करना चाहिए, राइट? एंड उनको ये भी पता लगने की ज़रूरत है कि आपकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी किस वे में है, क्यों है, कैसे है. अगर विमेन, बिकॉज अब क्या हो रहा है, व्हाट आई एम सीइंग हैपनिंग इज ऑल्सो कि हाँ ठीक है, समटाइम्स व्हाट ऑल्सो हैपन्स इज दैट that princess syndrome is also there. It is a very real thing. I have also felt it, that आप अगर आप इतनी immunity किसी को दे रहे हो, but that is not immunity. आप उनको again personhood deny कर रहे हो, आप उनको infantilize कर रहे हो. एक जगह या तो the other problem is कि औरतों को दो extremes में view करा जाता है, and men also view it like that. तो जब आप दो extremes ही men को दे रहे हो देखने के लिए, it all boils down to, for both men and women, to be able to assert their unique differences within different systems, whether it's family, society, school, any system, any social system they are part of, and have that window of tolerance, expand that window of tolerance ki look, you are different than me in this way, there are certain roles and responsibilities for all of us in society, but it won't matter if you don't do it this way, or you are not the one doing this. So that entire re-education, unlearning and relearning is the process of happening. But I get what you're saying also. It's also the entire thing about willingness and intent also comes in. So if you're asking me how to bring that in, there is a very long process to it. There's a theory behind it, but again, I cannot generalize it for anyone.
Any closing thoughts?
So the only closing thought that comes to my mind repeatedly is that, for all that people say that, if and we discussed some of it, that there's a good girl manual that if we follow this will not happen, bad girl, bad boy manual if we not follow. It all begs the question that if today we make a society or a nation where all the women wear burqas and stay at home, will there be no rapes? If somebody can guarantee me that, I'm happy to have a conversation. That's all I would want to say.
I'd like to say that yesterday I saw a news that a monitor lizard was raped by 4 men, and this was the news just yesterday, and that really, and you had just messaged me I think that time, and I was like, what do I say here? Lizards are not spared in their life. So I want to say that we have to move towards creating a society where we start working on our inner selves. And this is not my vested interest as a psychologist, but what I have understood in my practice, in my work, in my studies also, in my training, is that creating safe and equitable spaces starts with answering and questioning difficult questions. And when you are able to do that, there are two things happening. One is that you are increasing your window of tolerance. Two is when there is more space for holding such emotions, there is more space for holding others in society. So there is no longer a sense of threat from others, whether it's other women, men, elders, not elders, whatever in society, authority is able to scare you only when you don't know what you are standing for and what you also need to demand back from that authority. So it's very important to create trauma informed safe spaces जहाँ पर सेंसिटिविटी इस लेवल पे है कि आपको ये भी आप ओके फील कर रहे हो कि अगला बंदा आपको इमोशनली रिस्पॉन्ड क्यों नहीं कर पा रहा है. यू अंडरस्टैंड कि इधर कुछ और काम की ज़रूरत है. बिकॉज होता क्या है, जब आप एक ऐसे इंसान से भी एक्सपोजर हो रहे हो जिसको फ़र्क नहीं पड़ रहा चीज़ों से, यू बिकम मोर इरिटेटेड. आपको लगता है इसको फ़र्क क्यों नहीं पड़ा है यार, इतना कुछ बड़ा हो गया, हाउ वाई हाउ. क्योंकि उनके पास या तो कैपेसिटी नहीं है या फिर दूसरी चीज़ ये है कि एज अ सोसाइटी हमने वो जगह नहीं बनाई जहाँ हम इन चीज़ों के बारे में बात कर सकें. एंड उससे क्या होता है, हम सेकेंडरी ट्रॉमेटिक स्ट्रेस होती है एक चीज़ जो अभी हम नेशन वाइड एक तरीके से एक्सपोज हो रहे हैं, वेयर वी आर एक्सपोज टू समवन एल्सेस ट्रॉमा, सो वी हैव सिम्टम्स रिलेटेड टू हु वुड हैव बीन एक्सपीरियंसिंग दिस ट्रॉमा. जब तक हम ट्रॉमा और उसकी बायोलॉजी नहीं समझेंगे, जैसे हमने फॉन फ्रीज इन सब चीज़ों की भी बात करी, हम हमेशा किसी को blame in the sense not in terms of rape but blame in the sense reactions of the public and the people around us, we'll keep looking for why is he as angry as me, which is helping no one. आपका एंगर तभी सर्व करेगा अगर हम एक सोसाइटी को बेटर करने में कुछ कर पाए.
Thank you so much for your time. I learned so much today and I'm really hoping that the audience learned something new.